A brilliant psychologist is dropped into a pre-Batman Gotham, not as a hero, but as a university professor named Schiller. His only lifeline to the superpowered world is a bizarre chat system, connecting him to a priest, Bitey Peter Parker, whose teenage angst he diagnoses with cold precision. But the real game begins when an 18-year-old Bruce Wayne, hiding his simmering rage behind a Playboy mask, sits down in his office for a chat. Bruce thinks he's testing the professor, but Schiller, fresh off a psychic power-up from a virtual Professor X, flips the script entirely. He bypasses the facade and peers directly into the abyss of Bruce's trauma. In a stunning power move, Schiller doesn't offer healing, he offers validation. He looks the future Dark Knight in the eye and gives his life's mission a name, revenge. Just as chillingly, he realizes his timid colleague is none other than Jonathan Crane. Schiller isn't just observing the birth of legends. He's actively shaping their psychological battleground from the front row, utterly defenseless. If one were to create a psychological profile of Gotham's Dark Knight, Schiller's diagnosis would dismiss cliques like cautious or wise. At its core would be a single, defining word: paranoia. Batman, Bruce Wayne, never truly trusted anyone. This skepticism had evolved beyond mere instinct into a conspiratorial mind, set etched into his very bones. The greater the intellect, the thicker the walls of suspicion. Schiller's answer had evidently plunged the young Dark Knight into an abyss of doubt. Bruce had never imagined someone could so easily pierce the layers of artifice he had painstakingly constructed. He had always possessed absolute confidence in his masks. Even Alfred, the man who had raised him, knew only a fraction of the truth. Yet this refined psychology professor, a man who appeared utterly incapable of physical resistance, had delivered the most impossible and yet precise answer. It was a scalpel to the soul, a direct hit. The moment the words left Schiller's lips, Bruce felt a long, suppressed magma churning in his soul. He had been waiting for someone to give him permission to finally unleash the vengeance he had delayed for so long. But it was the man, more than the answer, who sent a chilling frost through his veins. The fire of vengeance, barely ignited, was instantly doused. Bruce would not, believe that someone could peer into his soul and see the bats of fear he harbored there, and do so through the lens of psychology alone. Schiller seemed to see the tempest raging within Bruce, yet he simply closed his notebook. "Our consultation is over," he said calmly. "I have a class to teach. Goodbye, Mr. Wayne." He knew the young man would need time to process this internal maelstrom. If Bruce could think it through, he would realize it was time to become the Batman and cleanse the city of its filth, not waste his days at a university among diligent faculty. What more did Bruce Wayne need to learn? Schiller was certain Bruce would figure it out. By then, Gotham's gangs would be headache enough for him. As for Schiller, he could settle back into the university, savoring the pleasures of a well-paid sinecure. At worst, he could take a holiday in Hawaii, far from Gotham's endless rain. Thanks to his predecessors Schiller enjoyed a respectable reputation at the university. He adhered strictly to a simple principle: an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. When the bell rang, his lecture began. When it rang again, he was gone. Office hours, that was an additional service. He maintained this routine for 5 days. Fortunately, his predecessor had also been a reclusive figure. Hired as a Gotham University professor only a few months prior, the original Schiller had few friends and distant relationships with his colleagues. This suited the new Schiller perfectly, allowing him to avoid any missteps. During his lunch, His phone screen lit up with a message from Peter. "Mr. Schiller, everything is just awful." The text was followed by a distressed emoji. Schiller knew this so-called chat system was no mysterious mind-to-mind communication. For him, it was a system interface. For the user, it was disguised to fit their cognitive framework. Peter believed he was messaging a sympathetic friend he'd met online, while Professor Charles Xavier saw it as a private messaging feature on an academic forum. The system guaranteed a response to his first message, but any further conversation depended entirely on his own skill. For now, his main correspondent was the somewhat naive, adolescent spider, man. As for a master manipulator of Charles Xavier's caliber, Schiller wouldn't dare make a move without absolute certainty. Schiller typed back slowly, "What's wrong, Peter? Trouble with Gwen." "Oh, that's not going great either. But that's not the awful part." "Did you mess up an experiment?" "Something like that. I knocked over some equipment and one of the lab spiders got out and it bit me." Schiller leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. He knew his intervention had subtly altered Spider, man's destiny. From their previous chats, he'd gathered this Peter Parker was from the main 616 universe, where the high school student was originally bitten by a radioactive spider during a public science exhibit. But this Peter, infatuated with Gwen Stacy, had constantly complained to Schiller about how captivating she was. Growing tired of it, Schiller had offered a suggestion: swallow his pride and apply for an internship at Oscorp, where Gwen worked, in the hopes of landing a position alongside her. Peter's grades were excellent, and he had actually gotten the position. Thus, the story changed from bitten at a public exhibit to bitten in an Oscorp lab. Ultimately, all roads led to the same destination. As the chosen emissary of the spider totem, Peter Parker was fated to be bitten, sooner or later. Schiller offered a few simple words of comfort before ending the conversation. The Gotham night was as thick as ink, a perfect night for sleep. But Bruce Wayne was not sleeping. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of Wayne Manor, staring at a moon nearly lost in the dense fog. In his hands, he held a thick file. On its cover was a single, clear name: Schiller Annadale Rodriguez. Schiller knew nothing of this. In the depths of a heavy sleep, he vaguely heard a system alert, but he was too deep under to heed it. In the quiet room, an invisible blue light silently scanned his body. The system's alarms grew more frantic, but another force seemed to prevent it from waking its host. Finally, after a burst of chaotic electronic static, Schiller's form vanished from the bed. Emergency protection protocol initiated. Locating universe coordinates. Target universe locked. Writing identity data. Write failure. Retrying. Write successful. When he awoke, Schiller instinctively rubbed his eyes, only to be blinded by a piercing glare. His first thought, "What the hell? The sun is actually out in Gotham." He yanked open the curtains. What met his eyes was not Gotham, but a bright, sun-drenched New York City. In stark contrast to Gotham's oppressive gloom, the New York morning was almost painfully clear. Sunlight streamed between the skyscrapers, landing hot on his skin. Glancing down, Schiller judged he was in a high-end apartment in the heart of the city. He turned and saw a cluttered desk. Pinned beneath a few empty liquor bottles was a work ID. Schiller, attending Psychiatrist, New York Pres. Beterian Hospital. Have I transmigrated again? Before he could even curse, his phone began to ring hysterically. He answered, and a deafening roar assaulted his ear. "Dr. Schiller, where the hell are you? You cannot miss today's joint consultation. Were you drinking again? Get over here, now." The shouting made his ears ring, but professional instinct took over. Doctor, emergency, patient. Since he was here, he might as well get to work. He grabbed the ID and rushed downstairs. An apartment of this caliber would have a car. Sure enough, he found a new Mercedes in the garage that matched the key fob in his pocket. Fortunately, he had attended an academic conference in New York in his past life. Relying on hazy memories and the car's navigation system, Schiller sped toward New York Presbyterian, the largest medical center in the city. The moment he stepped through the main entrance, a nurse rushed toward him from the front desk. "Dr. Schiller, thank God," she said urgently. "You have to get upstairs. The joint consultation has already started." Unsure of this new Schiller's personality, he settled on a cold, detached expression, nodding once as he followed her briskly upstairs. The conference room door swung open, and the lively discussion within fell silent. All eyes turned to him for a moment before quickly shifting away. Schiller moved without a word to the empty seat clearly reserved for him. As he sat, his peripheral vision completed a preliminary scan of the room. It seemed this version of Dr. Schiller held a position of some importance. The group seated across the table was clearly not from psychiatry. One of them, a man radiating an ill-concealed arrogance, lifted his chin. Right on time, he drawled. "Best to let the head shrinkers have a look first. That way, the patient won't try to fake insanity and get handsy with the nurses on my operating table." Schiller's gaze fell on the man's name tag, Stephen Strange. Dr. Strange, excellent. He was back in the Marvel universe. Schiller couldn't be bothered with him. Judging by Strange's appearance and demeanor, the car accident that would change his destiny was still some time away. For now, he was nothing more than an insufferably egotistical surgeon. Schiller silently reviewed the medical file. Strange, however, seemed to have taken a particular dislike to him. It was simple. The lingering scent of alcohol on Schiller, coupled with his tardiness, offended the elite surgeon's sensibilities. Strange had always considered psychiatrists a pack of charlatans, and he barely concealed his contempt. Throughout the meeting, Strange peppered Schiller's analysis with snide remarks. Schiller simply recited his diagnostic opinions by the book, completely ignoring the provocations. When the meeting ended, Strange deliberately bumped his shoulder as they passed in the doorway. A flicker of irritation rose in Schiller, but he quickly suppressed it. He knew fate itself would teach this arrogant man his most profound lesson. If Strange weren't so thoroughly obnoxious, Schiller might have offered a subtle warning. As it was, he would let the man walk his necessary path of suffering alone. Just as the consultation ended, Schiller's phone rang again. On the other end was a female voice, melodic but laced with anxiety. "Dr. Schiller, is your meeting over? Could you possibly come to Stark Tower now? Tony, he's not doing well." Tony Stark, Schiller's mind raced. Was this before or after his abduction? He didn't have time to check. A black car with the Stark Industries logo had already pulled up silently at the hospital entrance. He had no choice but to get in. In the passenger seat sat a strikingly beautiful woman with an air of professional competence. Ever since Tony got back, she began, well, you saw how he was at the last session. He's started losing his temper over nothing, doing all sorts of erratic things. Last night, I heard him crying." "Miss Potts," Schiller confirmed. Pepper Potts covered her eyes with a hand, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm sorry, I can't lose my composure, but I really need your help with this. I need you to do everything you can for him." Schiller understood. The timeline was clear. Tony Stark had just escaped from Afghanistan after discovering his company's weapons were being sold to terrorists. And he, in this new identity, was the psychiatrist a worried Pepper Potts had hired to treat a Tony Stark tormented by post-traumatic stress disorder.